Ryan here. Today we're going to look at my 2005 Nissan Xterra. I bought this truck a few months ago as a project truck. I knew there were some issues on it, but I love working on vehicles. There's some problems with the cooling, some problems with some interior stuff, but that's what these videos are for. I'm here to walk you through fixing some things on your own and fixing them affordably. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about the Nissan's cooling. It has some issues with overheating. Now, it could be a number of things, but what I'd like to do is usually start cheap, try to fix the issue before digging in too deeply. The main components of a cooling system are the radiator, the thermostat, the heater core, all of the hoses, and obviously the water pump. Now, it could be any of these issues, unfortunately. My problem is that the car will operate just fine up to heating temperature. It'll even run that way for a while, and then eventually it overheats. Now, the cheapest parts to replace, in this case, are going to be the thermostat and the temperature sending unit. Now, those two things you can get on the internet for pretty cheap. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but those are easy to get to, easy to change, and of course, you need to empty the system to do that, so when you replace that fluid, that also helps the situation. If it's not the thermostat or the sending unit, then we'll have to dig in a little bit further, looking at the radiator and eventually the water pump. Well, how do you know that your car is overheating? Well, the obvious answer is to look in the dash, look for any red warning lights or the temperature gauge going up. Well, that's where it gets a little bit tricky. In this particular car, the gauge is perfectly fine. It doesn't show that it's up above any normal temperature, and there's no warning lights for me. That's where some other things come in handy. Getting something like this, an OBD reader, really gives you all the stats on your vehicle, gives you a lot more detail, a lot more accuracy in the readings. Devices like this can be really handy. It gives you the basics, like miles per hour and your RPMs, but also dives in a lot deeper. Just about any stat that your computer puts out in your car, this thing can pick up. So you need one of these and a little tablet to get you started. Now, although my dash said that the temperature was just fine, the dials on my OBD reader were through the roof. And a quick tip on these readers, if you have one and you're out shopping for a used car, bring it along. Ask them if you can plug it in and take a look around. If they don't want you to, there's probably a good reason why. Now, to make this job easier, I'm going to remove all the fluid from the system. It'll be a lot cleaner, and in this particular case, I don't know how old the fluid is, so it's better to just get rid of it and start over again. Now, there's a valve in the bottom that you need to get to in order to empty all the fluid, and there is a pan underneath in the way. So I'm going to remove that, and then we'll be able to drain the system. Now, underneath the car, there's 8 screws that you need to remove, 2 in the rear and 6 up front. You can either use a Phillips head screwdriver or a little ratchet head. Now, luckily, someone's already taken out 3 of them and lost them for me. So let's get this out of here and then we can start draining the system. Now here's our pan. Super easy, but it is looking a little rough. So I'm gonna go ahead and sand this down, give it a coat of black paint before putting it back in. Obviously an optional step. Now before we start draining from the bottom, you need to have air coming in from the top. So just go ahead and remove your radiator cap, set it right next to it, or just leave it on there, and that gives the system air so it'll actually drain out quicker. Now I went ahead and lifted the truck. You probably won't have to do this since Nissans sit pretty high, but it makes things a little bit easier to show you. Now, the actual drain is on the far left side of the car in the very front of the radiator. I'm going to bring my camera in here and show you that. It looks like a simple Phillips head screwdriver, but it's plastic. So if you unscrew that, the liquid starts to flow. Make sure you have a drain pan, and I'm actually going to use a gallon jug to start collecting the fluid, and this is only if you make a mess. Alright, so things got really messy really fast. So I revised my plan a little bit. I went ahead and got a giant Tupperware tub, jacked the car halfway to the ceiling, and stuck it underneath. So that way we can let it drain as much as it wants until it's completely empty, and then we don't have to worry about it. Okay, so now that that unpleasantness is over, I'm going to start working on the thermostat first. Now, the thermostat goes in about midway up the right side of the actual block, and it comes out of the inlet pipe that comes out of the bottom of the radiator. Now I have my camera down here to kind of show you exactly where it is, going in the right side underneath this actual air vent into the throttle body. If you look underneath that, it's on the right side, It's a big hose. You'll see that it'll match obviously the inlet on the thermostat body itself. Now also I noticed some interesting facts. When I emptied the radiator fluid, it was green. Now, based on my research, this particular motor takes a blue colored Nissan only antifreeze. So that could actually be part of my problem right there. Now, to get started, I'm going to remove this air duct system. There's actually only a few screws. It looks like a lot of work. I'm going to get that out of the way, and then I should be able to get to it, but I may need to take some more stuff out of the way first. Okay, so it's still really tight in here. I have a few lines here, looks like some water lines. I need to remove those, just get them out of the way. I don't need to actually take them off. And I'm also going to take the top of the air box off just to give myself some more room to play. Hopefully after that, I'll be able to get to the thermostat. Okay, so it looks like I have the hoses out of the way, and now I can finally start taking off the actual thermostat. Now I'm going to use the other part as a reference, and if you kind of hold the part the way it looks, well, that's why I bought a GoPro. Okay, so if you take the part and you put it in the way that it looks like it goes in, that you can kind of see on the side of the motor, you get a good idea of where the actual screws are. So there's two on the top, one on the left, one on the right, a single one on the bottom, and you'll see that there's a small hose and a large hose. The small hose kind of just wraps around the thermostat. Take the right side of that out first, so that way when you take the screws out, the whole thing will come out. You don't have to worry about tearing that hose or bending it in a weird way. Okay, so I got the thermostat out, and what you want to make sure of is that you actually get the old gasket off as well. Your new thermostat should have come with a gasket. Now, in this particular case, it doesn't look like this thermostat was ever replaced at all in this vehicle, and I can tell that mostly because of how it looks. It looks like it's 100 years old instead of 10. It's also really gritty, and it kind of sounds weird. I don't know if you can hear that. It doesn't seem to be acting right, and I have to put quite a bit of pressure on it to get the spring to move. So the more pressure, obviously, the more heat it takes to soften it up and get it to move and start moving fluid. So a good thing to replace it. And also, when you replace it with the new one, kind of look how this hose is shaped. It's shaped a little oddly. When you do replace the thermostat, just put it on the same way that you see it here first before putting it into the motor. And that way you don't have to worry about twisting it and turning it once it's down in there in its a tight little crevice. So I'm going to replace this. I'm going to put the new gasket on, seal it back up. And a really good tip here is, since you're digging into your motor and you have a clear view of the serpentine and a lot of the water hoses, just take a look around, feel your hoses, flex them, make sure they're kind of supple and they're not cracking, and also check your serpentine for slack and also cracking in that as well. Maybe a time to swap those out if you're already accessing all this here. Okay, so the thermostat's back in, and I have my other camera down here showing you. What's really important is that you line up, there's a little tab that you can see inside of the actual gasket that hangs out the right side of the thermostat housing when it's lined up correctly. If you can see that tab and it's in the right place, the way it was before, then you have the gasket incorrect. And that way you just go ahead, tighten everything down, and just make sure you don't over tighten, because these alloy type parts are prone to cracking if you yank them too tight. So now that that's back in, I'm going to put all the hoses back together, and then we're going to move on to the temperature sensor. Okay, so on to the temperature sensor. Now, after a lot of digging, I found the temperature sensor in the very back of the motor in a solid coolant hose that runs from the back left of the motor to the back right of the motor. Now, I'm going to go ahead and throw my camera back here and just kind of show you where the sensor is. So coming from the outside, going towards the back, and then digging down a little ways there, and the sensor is right there. Now, the sensor is pretty deep, so I have my new one here. It is the actual electrical plug and then the sensor itself. Now, the beauty of having the new part first is that you can size up what it is without having to stick your hands back there and figure out what the size is. So I found out that this is a 3/4, and obviously you're going to need a deep socket to get past this particular connector, and we'll go ahead and take it off with this and should be able to get it right back on relatively quick. Surprisingly more space than the thermostat job. So I'll get this in and out, should be pretty quick, and then we have to refill and hope that our temperature stays down. Okay, wow, that was a little less than easy. I was blessed with very large hands, and in tight spaces a little difficult, but I finally got it out. Now, at first kind of inspection, if you see here, I don't know, I'll bring it in here for you. This is rather corroded. Now, it's definitely got some coatings on it. That kind of worries me. It kind of points to the fact that there may be more truth to the fact that the antifreeze is not right. It may not be the right thing that was in this car, but we have a new one. We're gonna replace it, we'll put it in, and we should get a more accurate reading as to what the temperature actually is moving forward. All right, back at it. All right, so I have the sensor back in. Now all I gotta do is reconnect everything, fill it back up with coolant, and then we're ready to rock. Now that everything's put back together, we're ready to fill it back up with coolant. I got the actual original blue coolant that's supposed to be in here, and I bought the pre-mix. If it's not pre-mix, you have to mix it 50-50 with water, distilled water, and then fill it up. So when you're filling it up, fill it up through the radiator, make sure to top off the reservoir, and then also burp the system, which is grabbing one of the pipes or one of the hoses, squeezing it to get as much air out of the system as you can before running it. Once you've done that, run the system for a while, get it up to temperature, come back, let it cool down, open it up, and make sure that you top it off, both the radiator and the reservoir tank. Now that the coolant's in, you're going to want to burp the system. To burp the system, just squeeze one of the radiator hoses near the top of the radiator to get all the air out. I'll show you that here. So you're going to want to look for bubbles, and so you want to keep squeezing until the bubbles go away, and obviously the level's going to drop because you're getting the air out. So fill it back up as the level drops and keep burping until there's not a whole lot of bubbles left. This will kind of help accelerate the process. It'll start drawing air out as you're driving it, but you want to make sure that you start off with as much fluid in the system as you can. All right, I think that's it. I'm going to close it up, run it for a while, and then once it's heated up, we'll see how the temperature readings look. Okay, so it's a good news, bad news situation. The good news is that when I'm just doing normal driving, the temperature is just fine. In fact, it's a lot better than it was before. The bad news is that if I let the car sit, it still creeps up pretty high. So what that means is that it looks like we are going to have to go after the water pump at some point. But as far as the thermostat and the temperature sensor, that's it. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.